I think I just got unmuted. Can you all hear me? Yeah? Okay, great. I want to make sure before we even get started here that we know how the meeting is going to work with muting and unmuting. Will that be one person kind of handling who is muted and unmuted, or are we able to do so to ourselves? Does anybody?
Scott, I think the way it's working is I have to unmute you.
Okay, if that's how it's working, I think we could possibly look into amending that for the next meeting, so that members of the board are able to kind of mute and unmute on their own. But for today, I think just for the sake of moving things forward and making sure that everybody's crystal clear here, Rob, you are handling muting and unmuting of board participants. And I think if you'd like to be unmuted by Rob, you can say so in the comments or click the unmute button over Rob's face, which is preferable there. Which of those two options is the best method for getting unmuted, Rob, just so that all the members know how to request to be unmuted?
I think just a quick chat, if they could chat that to me,
or a hand up, like a finger. Does that work for you guys?
And Scott, can I just leave you unmuted throughout so you can call people's names and that kind of thing?
Yeah, that's fine. And if there's any feedback or anything on my end, somebody please let me know so that we're not listening to a bunch of noise. Okay. Does that work for everybody here so far? Yeah. Okay. Great. Who are we missing from our group here?
It looks like we're just missing Sonia as well as Councilman McCormick.
Is that it? Okay. Do we want to does anybody know if they're on their way or we're not sure?
I know Sonia had was planning to join by phone. She had some other conflicts, but she was planning to join. So I think we could go ahead and get started without her. Okay,
sounds great. Thank you all for being here. I know we have a number of other people watching or on the call today. I am Scott Crayley. I'm I've been selected to be the rotating chair of this board for this meeting. We are the LeadSafe Advisory Board. And I suppose we can go to a quick round of introductions. I was selected to this board as a landlord on the west side of Cleveland. I own a number of duplexes and have been actively participating in the LeadSafe Cleveland Coalition for a few years. Rob, go ahead.
Rob Fisher at Case Western Reserve, Mandel School, and I'm the LeadSafe auditor.
Thank you. Wynette?
Hi, good morning. Wynette Cheers. I'm a senior program officer at Enterprise Community Partners, and I'm one of the managers of the LeadSafe Cleveland Coalition.
Thank you very much. Diana?
Diana Shulsky with Howard Hanna, and I'm taking notes for the meeting.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that. And Aparna?
Good morning. I'm Aparna Bowl. I'm a pediatrician at Rainbow Babies and part of the LeadSafe Cleveland Coalition Steering Committee.
And Director Allen? Yes, I see Director Allen is on the call. Director, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Good morning.
Okay. Good morning. I am Director Allen, and I am with the Department of Building. I'm the interim director for the Department of Building and Housing.
Okay, thank you very much. So moving forward, we have sent out an agenda here. This quick welcome. We're going to move on to the approval of the minutes from the last meeting. Have all of you had a chance to review the minutes? Yes, great. Are there any current questions about those minutes or any concerns there? Okay. I suppose the minutes will be made available with other meeting materials going forward. I think we discussed that we would be posting the schedule, minutes, and reports on Building and Housing's website, on Council's website, and on the auditor's websites in those 3 locations. Is that, I know we don't have Councilman McCormick here, but perhaps Director Allen, you can confirm that we'll be able to post meeting materials on the Building and Housing website, and Rob, you can confirm about the auditor's website. Okay, take that as confirmation. So we have, we're prepared to post these minutes as approved to those locations. For a motion to approve the minutes. Anyone?
I can make a motion to approve the minutes.
Okay, for a second.
Second.
Thank you. Any opposed? All right, seeing that, the minutes are approved as written. Thank you again to Diana for doing that work. That's really helpful, and we appreciate that you volunteered to do that. So let's move right along. So we discussed dates for the upcoming meeting. We were trying to hammer out dates, I believe, in November and January, but we had not yet found dates that were going to work for everyone. So I want to thank you for playing point on that process. I know it's kind of a headache to wrangle or herd all of us cats here. And I, for one, will make more effort to respond quickly to any polls about dates that you put out to us, just so you can, to make that as easy as possible for you. But can we tentatively say that the meetings as planned are currently for the final week of November, and then for either January 20th or 21st is what we're currently working with?
That does sound right. I mean, it was we were either looking at the week of the 9th, if in fact we would have, the next round of reports ready. And if not, it would be right the week of the 28th of November. And then the following meeting, our first meeting in 2022 would either be, January 20th or January 21st.
Okay, great. And so we're maybe waiting on Rob to find out if we'll have the report ready by November. Rob, do you have that now, or is that something you know when you'll know?
Yes, we could do it November 9th if that date works for folks. That week of the 9th.
Okay. All right, that's great. First, welcome to Councilman McCormick. If you'd like to take a moment, we did a quick intro. We've approved the minutes and we're discussing upcoming meeting dates. If you'd like to say hello, the mic is yours. Okay, we'll give him a minute. In the meantime, so we don't have those finalized dates. We will get a poll out, and can we make sure that we are providing notice of those meetings pretty much as soon as we have them for the upcoming meetings, to make sure those get out with plenty of time for anybody who wants to be involved. And that would be put out by, I'm sorry, maybe someone can remind me who was responsible this last round for sending out, properly noticing the meeting on behalf of the city.
I can work with the city's team again, the communications team, to make sure that it gets out.
Okay, if you need any support on that, I mean, I think that early November might be a particularly challenging time to ensure that noticing is done properly. So again, probably just making sure that it gets done early, which is in part on all of us to make sure we fill out those polls, get those dates nailed down as soon as possible, so we get all that done before things get a little perhaps chaotic downtown.
Yep.
And help on that.
Yeah, I'll send out an updated poll in a couple days for us to complete.
Awesome. Councilman McCormick, do you want to say a quick hello and introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning. And I'm sorry I was having a little trouble connecting. Kerry McCormick with Cleveland City Council. Good to see everyone. Just excited to be a part of this board and to continue the work that we've been, working as a comprehensive group for over 2 years now, I think, or even more than that. So good morning. Good to see everyone.
All right. Good morning. Thank you very much. So moving on in our agenda here, we now have about 15 minutes for an update and a quick conversation with Director Allen. We'd like some updates on staffing and technology as they're being used to support the implementation here, and to potentially further discuss the relationship between this board and building and housing. So Director Allen, the floor is yours.
Hello?
Hello.
Hello?
Hello.
Good morning again. Okay, updates. Well, we are progressed. We are moving along with the lead initiative. As far as we still are facing challenges with our hiring, with the staffing. There were some things that we had to work out with civil service as far as getting for the legal secretary position. We had 3 legal secretary positions, which is still vacant. And the reason it was vacant was because the applicants were not able to pass the typing requirement. So I have been working with civil service to see if we can amend that typing requirement for building and housing, since what we're going to be doing in building and housing is not going to involve extensive typing as they have to do in the law firm. So as of Friday, civil service did approve that. So they did reduce the typing requirement from 55 words per minute to 35 words per minute. So with that, now I'm hopeful now that we'll be able to obtain applicants that can pass that. And that we were having a challenge with was the environmental compliance specialist 2. And that one was because a lot of individuals were applying for that, but they did not have the lead certification. So we did work with civil service to see if we can bring them on board, and they have 6 months, as long as they had the other experience. And then we'll give them 6 months to obtain their lead certification, So civil service did approve that last Friday as well. So those 2 positions, I'm hoping now within the next couple of weeks, we can continue to move forward in getting those positions filled. The environmental compliance specialist 3, we're still having a challenge with that one. We did some interviews. Actually, we did 5 interviews last week for that position. Wonderful candidates. If I could, I'll hire all of them. Unfortunately, the pay was too low. So we did get turned down by a couple of them, and I'm going to reach back out to the other 2 to see if they would still be interested. So that's where we are at with the hiring. We have been struggling, we had stumbling blocks, but I'm hoping now that we can begin to move forward since we did get those approvals and amendments to the requirements for the environmental compliance 2 and the legal secretaries. As far as with our system interface, unfortunately, we are still facing challenges with that. The last word I heard on that, which was last Friday, the 13th, they ran into another hurdle, and they anticipate on having that hopefully resolved by the end of this month. And then we can move forward with testing, and then hopefully by September, begin to work on the interface and have that up and running for us. So that's where we are with those 2 challenges, the staffing and the system. Last Friday, we got together last Friday and we had a brainstorming session for the prosecution and the enforcement piece to see what we need to do and how we can begin to move forward in that. Initially, there was talk, obviously, as far as issuing tickets. However, as the team, as we begin to review and discuss what we can do, number one, that will give, because our main thing is compliance, obviously, and we understand it, as well as enforcing, letting these landlords know that this is a serious issue, it's an urgency, and you must begin to make steps to abate it. So when we draft a process that we're going to continue to work through this week, issuing a violation notice, and with the violation notice, that gives them their due process, where if they decide they can appeal and get more time from the board, because anytime we issue a violation notice, you do have to give the citizen a right to appeal. And those who really want to abate, or those who really want to resolve the issue, as always, we'll work with them, and those who do not, we'll issue the violation notice, and then we will prosecute on the violation notice, and it will be a misdemeanor 1. So that's just one avenue that we're looking at to increase compliance, as well as issuing the tickets. But both, regardless of which way we go, issuing the tickets or the violation notice, number one is going to involve the system enhancement and the additional staffing. And the biggest limitation that we're facing, or challenge that we're facing for both of them, is the staffing issue. But as I said, hopefully once we start getting these positions filled within the next couple of weeks, we can definitely begin to move forward and begin to enforce that piece of it. Another avenue that we are doing to enforcement is communication, because we do know that there are some landlords out there that really want to do the right thing. And we're hoping there's more that want to do the right thing, but there's a lack of maybe awareness of, or understanding, or communication. So we are working on that communication piece. We have just finished a 6-page FAQ, which is pending with our communication department. We're waiting for them to review and approve. And then that 6-page frequently asked question document is going to go on our website. We're going to have it at different outlets within the Department of Building and Housing. We're going to also make sure the courts get a copy of it. And it's going to be something we're going to use as part of our communication outreach, as we continue to make landlords aware and train and get them to understand the importance of this initiative and the impact that it has on the children. We also got our brochure completed by the print shop, so we're going to start distributing that. One of my goals, hopefully this week, with the brochure and the postcard, we have an inventory on hand that we're going to begin to distribute to the public as they come in to Building and Housing for their or with questions regarding the lead. We're also going to make sure that council have a nice pile for their constituents in their environment, in their areas. We're also looking to how we're going to expand our communication outreach in the communities, because a lot of people that we're hearing, a lot of folks that's calling us, and they are not aware of the lead. They don't understand the lead. They don't understand why they have to do this. So one of our biggest things we want to do better in explaining to the landlords why you need to have this lead certification. So those are some of the things that we're working on as far as the enforcement and the prosecution, but looking at more ways to enforce. Yes, we do want to prosecute. Yes, we want to issue the tickets. Yes, we want to issue the violation. Yes, we want to communicate and get them more aware so they can understand why you need to get the certification. So those are basically some of the things that we're doing in Building and Housing as we move forward to enforce, to make the landlords more aware, and to increase our compliance with the lead certification. And I think I covered everything that I wanted to say at this point, unless anybody have any questions.
Great. Who would like to start with a question? Okay, I'll jump in. I have a question that I guess I'm not sure whether this is under the umbrella of Building and Housing or not. But I had a question about compliance, not on behalf of landlords, but on behalf of the contractors. I know that, you know, over the past however many years of being myself certified as a RRP contractor for the purpose of doing my own work, that the certification is something that seems like a lot of contractors got, but that in practice wasn't strictly adhered to. And I think my understanding is that the EPA was the sort of authority for enforcement there. Now that the city is stepping in, is the city going to be doing any sort of spot checks or compliance related activities around the upcoming RRP contracting that will be having happen to get these properties compliant?
Okay, I'm sorry, can you repeat that again? Because you faded out on my end.
Sure. RRP contractors who will be performing the work to bring properties into compliance. I guess the question is who's regulating or checking or enforcing the RRP guidelines within that work? Is that building and housing, because those contractors would be registered with building and housing as RRP contractors, or is that some other authority?
Well, to my knowledge, I have not heard that that was building and housing, so I can look into that and check and get back with the board. But as of now, I have not heard that that was within our jurisdiction.
Okay. So at the moment, does anyone else on the board know who would be doing that sort of compliance enforcement on the contracting side?
Well, the RRP certification is an EPA certification.
Yeah.
So that would be US EPA, Scott, from what I understand.
Right. I totally understand. I also am aware that that's generally not something they've been engaged in on small jobs, you know, residential construction, small projects, that sort of thing. I think that there's a lot more stringent requirements if it's an abatement job or if there's like some sort of commercial project happening. But I also know that there's sort of a culture of nominal compliance within the ranks of contractors, that this is a fairly easy certificate to obtain, and that with limited or no enforcement among, you know, smaller scale contractors, that we're probably going to just see that ongoing culture of sort of nominal compliance with actual non-compliance. And I've started to get reports of that from, you know, grantees through the lead program as well. And so I'm wondering if it seems like building and housing could certainly be a proper avenue, because they already have jurisdiction over any contractors through that contractor's licensing and registration. I'm not sure who else would have clear jurisdiction. I don't think we can rely on the federal government to retool for the sake of checking in on Cleveland contractors. But yeah, just soliciting ideas on that. As I do know it's going to be a growing issue.
And I do like know even now, as far as with the contractors, even when we in our demolition department, we don't per se verify if they're licensed or if what they're submitting is valid. So I don't see at this point, I don't see how we would do that here, because number one, we don't have the staff with that skill level or that expertise. But and that's just now.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure that's something, if that was going to become building the housing, that probably would be number one somewhere down the line, because we would definitely have to hire and put a plan in place to make sure that we have the staff to be able to research or to be able to validate the contractor expertise and skills, which we do not have right now.
Okay, yeah, I totally understand that is the status quo, is that we do not have a clear mechanism there. I guess we can table it for now in the interest of moving forward, but I would like to circle back with this board to try to plug that hole as far as compliance goes. I think that's going to be a growing concern as we're starting to engage with potentially tens of thousands of units, there's going to be a larger and larger number of them that will need work, and if nobody has any idea how that work's going to be measured in terms of lead safety, I think that's going to be increasingly an issue.
And
Well,
also,
Scott, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say also, we're always open to ideas and suggestions as far as the enforcement piece, because right now that's the biggest, one of the biggest piece that we're really trying. We're throwing out all type of ideas and looking, we're going to begin to look at other cities and see what they did for the enforcement part of this, because like I said, number one, we know that we understand the severity of it and the criticalness of it, but we definitely feel that our landlords, they probably don't understand the severity of it. So on the one side, we want to make them aware of it. And then on the other side, we don't want to create hardship for the landlords as well, but we need them to understand you have to address this issue. So we are definitely open. If anybody have any ideas or suggestions to help us get the information and help us with the enforcement piece of it.
Thank you. Why not? What were you going to say?
No, we can table it, like you mentioned. That's okay.
Okay, great. Maybe we can circle back to that if we have time, or put it on the agenda for the next meeting. It is 9:30, so let's move on to the Let's Safe Auditor Report. Rob, the floor is yours.
All right, good morning, everyone. So I'm gonna be providing highlights from the Q2 report. Let me just get my screen share. All right, so and just to follow up on the point earlier about posting. So the slides and the report, what we're going to give the board a week to provide additional comments, and also Director Allen before we finalize the Q2 report, but it'll be posted as soon as it's completed at the multiple locations that have been mentioned. So what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the approach, some data on implementation from Q2, and then kind of the key measures and takeaways that we're seeing in this second period of 2021. So just to remind everyone, each of these zones or groupings of zip codes that have been subject to the ordinance thus far. So in the first quarter of the year, Zone 1, you can see 44135 and 44120 were the first two zip codes that were received a requirement relative to the lead safe ordinance. And then in the second quarter of 2021, 44111 and 44106, they had a deadline for compliance by the end of the second quarter. So just remembering that we have new owners being impacted as the zones increase over time, but there's also the continuing outreach and compliance activities of property owners in the zones that have already passed. So it's as Director Allen noted in her comments, there's kind of ongoing activity, both prospectively and folks whose deadlines have already passed. And so to give you a sense of the properties in these zip codes that have been impacted, these are data from the Poverty Center's baseline report that we completed last year. And what I want to point out here is this distinction. On the far right, we have a group of properties that are believed to be rentals. In the center column, we have properties that have been known to be rentals, meaning they have been on the city's rental registry over a 2-year period. And then adding those together are our estimate of the total universe of rental properties in each one of these zip codes. So the first thing you see here is looking at the center column, you have about 2,000 known rentals in each of these zones thus far this year. At the same time, we have this group of other properties, which according to all records we can see, all public records and the way that these properties are being handled, they appear also to be rentals, even though they were not in fact registered with the city. And again, in both of these zones, we have about 5,000 additional properties that seem to be rentals. So that's what gets you to this large number of about 7,000 in each of these first 2 zones. I want to point this out also because we have, if you think about it from building and housing's perspective, the folks that they have the most connection with are those that have in fact been registered in the past. Those are the ones that have already shown some level of compliance with the past requirements in this area. There's already some communication in place. So those are the ones that are a little bit closer. Those owners are a little bit closer to a process. The ones on the far right are requiring additional outreach, education, awareness, all those things to get them into the system and fully compliant. So we're gonna look at some other numbers about how much uptake there has been among owners thus far. I would keep in your head kind of this idea that maybe roughly 4,000 properties that are what we call known rentals have already been subject to the ordinance, but there's another 10,000 that are likely rentals out there so far. So in total, about 14,000 properties that have been subject to the ordinance so far.
Rob, can you clarify for me very quickly the term properties? Is that addresses, units, or what's meant by that?
Yeah, this is literally parcel properties. They're not, so this is not counts of units in those properties, though we do.
We could be talking about twice as many or more actual certificates. If you said there's approximately 14,000 estimated properties that are currently in play here, and some X number of those are duplexes or triples or quads. Do we have an estimate of how many units that represents?
Yes, I mean we can present the data as units as well, and most of the it is the property that gets the certificate. Although a property owner could choose to only have one unit certified in a property. It's usually all the units that are being applied for. So the certificate's at the level of the property.
Yeah, I think the distinction is perhaps pertinent insofar as one, as on a per unit basis, it gives us a better understanding of how many renters are then now covered by the protection of a lead safe certificate or lead clearance exam. And then 2, it also gives us a bit of an estimate of the cost involved on the other side of the equation, insofar as generally it is a certificate that you apply for per property, but it's also something that you pay for by unit. And so if we have it just would be interesting to know the character of the properties that are coming into compliance, and also like what number of units those represent.
We can definitely do that, Scott. And I think just remembering the zones were determined by building and housing to each quarter is about 1/8 of the number of rental properties in the city. So the groupings were created. And so if you look at how much of the properties have been covered in the first 2 zones, the first 2 quarters, it's roughly 1/4 of all rental properties in the city are now subject, but we could also tell you what percent of units in those property, in the city, rental units in the city are now covered. Same deal. All right, so let's,
Can I ask a quick question about that too? Can you hear
yes,
me okay?
Dr. Bowl, go ahead.
Okay, and I'm sorry, maybe this was part of the question and I either missed or misunderstood it. Was that last question asking about the type of rental properties, Scott? I mean, that was my question, was whether we could understand what the types of rental properties these are, like if they're multi-unit buildings or duplexes or other kinds of rentals. And maybe that was embedded in your question, Scott, and I missed it.
Yeah, I'm all for like expanded demographics on compliance and non-compliance. I think it kind of, I'm with you across the board in terms of just trying to better understand like who's complying, who's not complying, what the success rate is. So
Yeah, and I think from the standpoint of someone who does counseling on primary prevention, in a clinical setting, we know nationally that there are particular property types that tend to be at higher risk. So it just helps, like if we're asking questions of families about the type of housing they live in, if we understand that there are local trends around property types that are more or less likely to be in compliance, I think that would be helpful. And I don't know if Rob, that's possible, or if that's a level of granularity that isn't. But I'm thinking like we know that typically, for example, duplex rental housing tends to be at higher risk for lead exposure in many cities. So that type of information on compliance might be helpful from a primary prevention counseling standpoint too.
Yes, and I would remind the board about our full report from 2020 that looked at every zip code and every neighborhood and described the characteristics of the rental housing in each of those geographies. As we now get to the point of seeing who's getting, let's say, certified and who isn't, we can use those data to compare who's doing, which owners are doing well to get their properties into the system and which aren't. It's just at this point with 300 lead safe applications, everybody's on the wrong side of that.
Yeah. Understood. Thank you. Yeah. And I'm sorry if I asked you to repeat yourself. I may have missed that. Thank you.
May I say something about the efforts of the Building and Housing Department to get the interface done? It's going to have a direct impact on breaking it down to units. And we always knew that would have to happen at some point. Rental registry was always just parcel number. It was a function of building and housing, and it was related to parcels. So it makes sense that we've started with what we know. As we go forward, and I think with the goal of the interface, if I'm right, Director Allen, it's going to be ongoing. We're not talking just to get us going here for the first few years, but ongoing 10, 15 years from now, we will always have to be drilling down by unit numbers. And I really love the idea of UPC code for each unit number, eventually when we can get to that point where documentation can follow a code. His addressing is completely inconsistent in the city of Cleveland and as in any suburb, any multi-housing addressing and so on. You could have a structure that is 75% compliant and one bad unit. And for the certification to be held up for 3 good units, it's going to eventually cause a lot of problems for people and residents as well. I believe that the interface, we're at such a really important junction with the technology right now. The decisions made now by Building and Housing to create the right interface tool for this program is critical. It should go to the highest level of IT minds and decision-making for our sanity going forward.
And I agree. I agree with you, Diana. And that's what we're looking, and that's what we're doing. And one of the things what you were saying with parcel, in the past we did use parcel. However, we did rely a lot on our units for rental registration as well, because before becoming interim director, I was the record administrator over the rental registration section. So we do break it down even now by units. But like you were saying, as moving forward, our system is going to have to be really sophisticated, really robust, and really expansive to capture the data that we want to capture.
Thank you.
All right, thank you all. I'm going to continue ahead, and please do offer your questions. So what I'm showing you here is data on applications over time, and you know that from the end of the first quarter, we really had nominal compliance with the ordinance in the first quarter. Processes were largely in place, but there wasn't a lot of activity. And so as you look on the left here, you can see those applications in the blue, and then approved applications or lead-safe certificates issued is the orange bar. And you can see in the second quarter, I mean, really dramatic growth in those numbers, applications doubling month to month from April to May to June, all very good. To see that movement in the right direction. On the right-hand side in the table, you do see those applications presented. This is total applications in the first 6 months across the 8 zones, rollout zones. So you can see most activity in zones 1 and 2. Also, the count of the units in those applications, we're presenting that. And then those determinations that were made could have been approval or a lead-safe certificate letter was issued. The application could still be pending, and usually that means that further documentation is needed, or there might even be some ongoing activity at the property that has to be completed before determination can be made. And then applications for lead-safe certification that were in fact denied. So in total, you can see out of the 293 applications that came in during the 6 months, 3/4 were in fact approved, about 15% were pending, and 7% denied, about 21 denials. If you think, well, you know, the ones that are still pending are not really, if you hold those out and say, of the decisions that have been made by building and housing, how many were approved versus denied, that gets you the much higher rate of approval of 92% of, let's say, certificate applications in which a determination has been made. And then this other note, thinking about back to the previous slide where we looked at the counts of known registered rentals by the zip codes and then total estimated rentals. If you take these numbers for zones 1 and 2 and divide them by those numbers in the previous table, what we're seeing is so far about 6% of the, if you use the denominator of known rentals, 6% of those properties have applied for lead-safe certification. And if you use a much larger population of known rentals plus likely rentals, it's about 2% have applied for lead-safe certification. So this is that reminding us that we do have a long way to go in getting the full population of rental owners to compliance, but these last few months have really shown us a trend that is very encouraging for making that happen. Any questions about this slide?
And Rob, just to add to that, our numbers have increased even as of today for the total number of approvals. So as of now, as of this morning, we were at 1,054 approvals. So that we are definitely slowly progressing.
Director Allen, is that applications or in fact approvals?
Those are approvals.
Okay.
And the application, the overall applications to date is actually 1,716.
So there you go. So we'll continue to see a graphic that will show this movement in the right direction.
Director Allen, is that units or individual applications?
The approval is that's units for approval, but then it equates to 432 structures or buildings for approvals.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So specifically to zones 1 and 2, what you see here is a group of bars for each of the zip codes that were in the first 2 zones. So on the far left, 44120 in zone 1, then 135, and then the 2 on the right are from zone 2. So it's the same data that we just looked at, but now it's at the zone at the level of the zip code. And if you say, well, how do these zip codes look compared to one another? You can, in focusing in the middle there, because that's where the majority of these applications as of June 30 were, you can see about 85% of applications in 44135 were approved. And then about 3/4 in 44111 were approved. And again, if you hold out those that are still pending, saying those aren't decisions that could go either way, the rates are considerably higher, all the way up to 100% of those. And really only in 44120 do we see, and that was one of the first 2 zip codes to be impacted by this. We have a somewhat lower rate, but only 32 applications as of this date.
Can I maybe note something here, Rob?
Yep.
It seems, my impression from the get-go has been that like when an application is submitted, if it's submitted with, with the appended paperwork as appropriate, that if there's a delay, there's a delay. But aside from that, there's really no particularly good reason an application would be denied. And I know we talked in the last meeting about potentially trying to find maybe a backdoor to tracking failures a little bit further upstream, specifically by inquiring of the inspectors how many inspections they're doing per zip code on a monthly or quarterly basis, and then how many of those inspections passed versus failed, which I think would give us a clearer picture. Because once we hit this point, if I'm handing in an application, presumably I've got a cleared lead clearance exam, and I'm just filling a single sheet of paper out, and it might take the city a minute to process that. But what still is lingering is a really substantial question in my mind is on that front end, how many houses or units are they going into, and how many of those are walking away after a given inspection with the papers they need to file a successful application.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Scott. And I'll share in a second kind of what we know about the lead inspectors that have been active. And I think now seeing these data, it's plausible that we could actually reach out to a handful of them to get a sense of clearance versus not clearance as they're doing it, because we have some very busy individuals contributing here. Though we had 31 inspectors who provided an inspection for these applications, many of them had only done 1 or 2 inspections, and it wouldn't be worth talking to folks that are doing 1 or 2 to see how they're doing versus somebody that's doing 20, 30, 40 in a period.
Yep.
So just rolling up these data into our accounts that we looked at in the first quarter and then coming forward. So Director Allen's already told us that if we add another column here for, thinking out to quarter 3, we're going to see much bigger numbers. And I have made a record of all the board member kind of questions and comments about how to break these data down. As we get these larger numbers of folks who have in fact come forward, property owners have come forward and begun the process, at least, we have a much better shot at making comparisons about compliance versus non-compliance and how to really do that targeted communication work. As with the low numbers that we had last quarter, it's very hard to think forward into that strategy. The data that we have on from the applications themselves, as Scott just mentioned, yes, if an application is complete, these decisions happen quickly. While the average time is about 4.5 days between submission and a letter being generated by Building and Housing, about 43% of the applications, that happens on the same date. So if it's well documented and everything's there, Building and Housing can push out a letter of determination immediately. And 87% had that determination happen within 1 week of submission. So again, very timely. There was a very small number that had a period of longer than 14 days from submission to a determination letter. What we want to continue to do is track those that are in a waiting period or pending period to see how long they remain on Building and Housing's docket as a proportion of all cases, but so far fairly low. If you take the let's say applications that have come in and look at who owned them, and this is preliminary because what we have from Building and Housing is they have a nice recording of who the listed owner is, who did the lead safe inspection, some other details about the property. So we have some limitations in how we can tell whether different people are in fact the same owner, but at least so far what we see in this group of 293 applications, we see 174 unique individuals or corporations that own these properties. About 44% had only showed up as the owner of a single property in this sample. And that looks very similar to data we had from the baseline period where we looked at all the rentals across the city and the predominance of kind of single kind of mom and pop owners who really own one or two rentals in the city. There is a group of, in at least so far, 8 owners that had sought certification for 5 or more properties. But those 8 folks accounted for about a quarter of all applications. So there are some owners who are frequent flyers who have multiple properties, and they have been very activist about getting their applications in, which is great.
I might note here that from a practitioner's perspective, I think it's also worth considering that I think there's a lot of sense to sequentially having properties inspected. There's a kind of a lot that goes into the logistics of communicating with tenants about preparation and the inspection process and the cost and all that. So as numbers come in, if somebody's doing one property, it may well be that they're doing that, getting those ducks in a row, and then moving on to the next one. So they may well have additional property.
That's entirely plausible. Thank you, Scott. And then the other thing we can see from the applications is who's doing the lead inspections. So far in this period, just over 30 lead inspectors had participated and had done an inspection, and that was used as part of an application for the lead safe certificate. Over half of these so if you flip the unit of analysis to the lead inspector and say, okay, of those 31, half of them had really done just a handful of properties in this total group, but that can change dramatically over time. But we have 3 folks who did inspections for 40% of the applications in the first 6 months. So we have, some inspectors who have been very active, and I think our top inspector had done 54 at least inspections that appeared in applications thus far. And the others were, north of 15 applications. And that's only to say they, for those that are really engaged in this work and get regular referrals and are known, there's quite a bit of work to be done. So Scott, going back to your comment earlier about, how do we know if the contractors are doing a good job? The other thing from the beginning is knowing how the inspectors are doing their work. So we've got 2 levels of third-party activity here. And, we do have some options to collect complaints on individuals who maybe property owners were dissatisfied with the way the contracting was done, or they, treatment in the process. But at this point, I think we need to figure out how to listen for those problems that are arising. We don't really have a back-end tracking data system to track at the level of the contractor or the inspector as yet. But I'm definitely hearing what you're saying about providing some oversight of these third parties who are really crucial to the partnership with homeowners.
Yeah, and I think that we may well get into that in the next agenda item, which we're a couple minutes behind on. So if we have additional questions about the auditor report, we could do those now, and then.
How about I'll just give you the high-level takeaways
Yeah, great.
that we hit in the report. So the substantial growth I mentioned, at least in the volume of applications, and we see it on the secondary, really, the gold standard, what we want to see happen, the certifications of these properties. But, the sobering side of it is compliance is still quite low relative to the population of registered rentals and likely rentals, at least in the zones that have been impacted. We see high approval rates. So seeing that, the process can be both quick and successful when properties and owners are able to navigate the process and get the materials that building and housing needs to make those decisions. We see a lot of property owners with a single property, but as Scott mentioned, this could be changing over time as folks owners may be working with different properties they own across time. We see the increased contracting for the inspectors. And then coming back to kind of where we started, which was Director Allen's discussion of enforcement and how what happens in the next couple months is really going to be crucial for understanding not just what's going to happen with owners in zone 1 and 2, but what signals are sent forward to the owners across the rest of the zones about what to expect from this process. And so, yes, there has to be a backstop somewhere for holding property owners who are in fact choosing not to comply accountable. But the focus has really been on the front end of that process, how to make it accessible, how to make sure everybody understand what's being expected of them. But there does have to be something on the back end regarding enforcement so that those properties don't languish in non-compliance. So with that, I think I'll stop.
All right.
Thank you for the time.
Yeah, thank you very much for your work on that, Rob. We really appreciate it. Does anyone, before we move on, have any specific follow-up questions about the auditor's report? Okay, seeing none, we have just under a half hour left in our meeting today. We've got just a couple items. We're going to have, I think, a just open implementation discussion where we can bring up concerns, comments about the rollout, the process, user experiences, and compliance, which I think we'll probably end up talking a little more about. And so we'll spend about 15 to 20 minutes on that, and then do a quick update, probably from Rob, on the public comment mechanism that we had discussed, I think, at a previous meeting, discussing the platform, the format, and how that is going to work. Does that work for everyone? Great, thank you. Okay, well, let's jump right in then. Does anyone want to open with implementation questions, whether user experience, compliance, the rollout, etc.? We can also get right into the compliance question around contractors and inspectors, which I think is pretty pertinent here, if that works for all of you. Great. So yeah, I think to kind of frame the question, I think we've put a lot of work, all of us, into sort of a top-down approach to implementation of this legislation. It's a lot of sort of bureaucratic infrastructure to make this happen because we're just dealing with really large numbers and a lot of moving pieces. So I think this question is a little bit more of a question of a bottom-up approach. I know things like Aparna, you had mentioned at the last meeting a question about what was the lag time between an EBL and an intervention by the city. Rob, you were just talking about the inspectors, and like we don't really know exactly what their success rates are and whether those should be somewhere where they're not or something like that. And then I was talking about contractors and RP contractors. So I think maybe it kind of suggests that we almost need a point person on bottom-up evaluation and compliance for the broader process. Does anybody have thoughts on that?
I guess, can you say a little bit more about what you're thinking? Are you saying like having a point person who can help illuminate some of these issues around like what does it really look like on the ground if there's a child identified with EBLL, and what does the process look like from the standpoint of the family? Or can you just say a little bit more about what you mean? Because it sounds like we do need a little bit more information about those issues on the ground.
Yeah, thank you. I think that the idea there is perhaps that we're collecting a lot of data about the general universe of rentals, and we're trying to stay on top of that. And then we're also trying to create a mechanism or a portal for feedback to be brought in. But it would potentially be good to have an accountable person, either someone who's appointed by this board or someone who's situated perhaps in under Rob as a role within the auditors project, who is essentially sort of like investigating those questions, not from a statistical approach, from like what does that look like across the whole universe of rentals, but more from a case-by-case approach where we're looking into what is and isn't working, or if we have reports of a failure of an RRP contractor to adhere to the requirements of that program, can someone go and get more information about that or investigate that a bit? Or if we're having EBLs that have a certain lag time, maybe those are outliers, maybe they're not, but it's hard to determine what they are if we're not looking at those cases sort of individually. And so, yeah, I'm not exactly sure where that person would sit, but I feel like it could be just a useful source of information kind of coming from the other direction, which could help ultimately strengthen the program by shoring up gaps in our knowledge.
Scott, I was just going to say that, you know, the auditor role includes this, from the ordinance, included this notion of, you know, tracking unintended consequences. I mean, there's some specificity in it, but it's really about things like, is the ordinance causing evictions? Is it leading to property turnover, exits from the rental space? It's not really about what's the quality of the work done by contractors, or, are things timely? And I'm struggling with who actually could do that. The one thing we did consider was, we have this listing of contractors, for example. We know who's listed with the city. We know who CHN is using as a contractor in the loans and grants space for their work. We don't really have anybody who's like a rating agency who could say, have there been complaints against this, like a Better Business Bureau for contractors. But theoretically, if we were going to do something that could populate this, we could have that listing show that this is a vetted contractor, or a contractor who has had more than this amount of activity doing work. Or I shudder to think about a quality rating, but if there was a way to get at that, it could be shared with the public that way. I just don't know that the auditor doesn't have the capacity to do investigatory work in the way you described. So I'm not sure how that gets done.
So suppose for a second, instead of trying to create a rating system, which I think would be pretty onerous in terms of how do you make that fair, so on and so forth. There's a lot of questions there. What would it take to have somebody between this meeting and the next go out and even pay the property owner a fee or something to be able to do so, but to go check the inspection, redo an inspection to establish like how close or far off is it to do a compliance check, or to go out and see an RRP job at like a spot check to help us understand, because we're reporting a lot of numbers. It would just potentially help add some depth to our understanding of what the numbers represent if we were to start to get a little bit of on the ground information from somebody who is going out and just doing a perhaps like a random sampling of following up on like, what does it look like when these things are done? And I'm not sure that would be on your side, Rob, perhaps Director Allen, that would be somebody that you could send out as well.
Because I know right now from where I'm at, I know I don't have the additional staff with that level of expertise to go out and do that. But I can't make any promise that that's something that we can do between now and the next meeting. I can toss it around I can talk about it with our lead initiative team, but I don't think that's something that like I said, we're not even equipped to do that.
Is there perhaps, I guess when I'm thinking about the building inspectors that currently exist, do they have training in an understanding whether or not an RRP job is being done to the RRP specifications, both in terms of, the contractors wearing PPE, but also in terms of containment in that?
The building inspectors, I can check, but I can tell you, I don't think so, but I can check to see. And then on top of what their current load is now, I really just can't see them being able to implement that into their workload right now. I mean, that's something, if we were to do that, take that on building and housing, that's something that I think we will have to strategize for, to plan and strategize for, and not just haphazardly begin to do it. And like I said, I don't even know if the skill set is there to do that.
That makes a lot of sense. It seems like maybe part of that would be a plan and some support from this board, and also additional funding from somewhere, but I wouldn't know as much about where that would come from.
Exactly.
Perhaps Councilman McCormick, you speak to that. I don't know if that's a council thing, or fund from the coalition or the resource center. Right. Thank you, Diana.
Well, as it relates to well, I can speak to, since Diana brought up something about the resource center, as it relates to the vetted list of lead safe workers on the coalition's website, the resource center has developed a survey to reach back out to those residents that have utilized, or landlords that have utilized contractors from that list, just to check in on satisfaction, right? So looking at the quality of service, the timeliness of those individuals, so that we can make sure that those individuals that are on the list should still be on the list. But that's just a small subset of the vetted folks that went through our process, right? That doesn't account for the free market of all the let's say workers that are out there.
And on a different note, outside the contract, the quality for the contract, one thing that Building and Housing that we have been doing from the implementation up to now, because obviously, you know, when you draft a piece of legislation, you naturally you don't envision everything that could happen once it's actually implemented. So what we have been noticing is a lot of things that was not taken into account when it was originally drafted and amended. So what we have started doing and going to continue to do is just start documenting those areas that we did not encounter, that we did not envision and anticipate, like a lot of questions we're having that we did not anticipate in the beginning. So the staff is now beginning to document those issues, like from the rental registration. I know it was mirrored from rental registration, but a lot of processes that the rental registration does not necessarily mean we can do them with the lead initiative. And then it takes us back to what's these individuals, should they actually been on the rental registry anyways. And one example is on rental registration, we have group homes or homes that does medical treatment. Should that be a part of the lead program or lead initiative? We have lead contractors, which is a lease to purchase. Does that mean that now they have to get a lead certificate? So we're coming up with a lot of questions that probably was not anticipated during the initial drafting and adopting of the legislation, which now make us go back and review, should these actually be should they actually be on the rental registry? So those are some of the things that we are looking at and beginning to take note of as well, documenting things that was not envisioned during the initial legislation, but now we're actually encountering them and we have questions. So one of the reasons that, once again, that it has taken us a while to get to the enforcement piece was because we were trying to establish and define our process. We wanted to make sure we knew what we were doing and was we administering the legislation properly before we began to enforce it. But now I think we're comfortable. We have already defined our process. So I think we're at a level now where we can really begin to move forward and begin that enforcement piece.
Thank you, Director. Is that something that you want to share? Like, would you be interested in synthesizing some of those concerns or those, unanticipated challenges with this board, so as to solicit feedback and support in addressing those problems?
Definitely. Once we start documenting and getting it in a structured, organized document, that is definitely something that I will be sharing with the board.
Excellent. Okay, well, I still would love to, personally, I would love to see if we could get some sort of forward-looking like action item, or at least the beginnings of a plan toward addressing some of these compliance issues. I'm not sure exactly what shape that would take as yet.
So Scott, I have a question. Have you had, so you're raising this as a concern, are there some concerns that you've had based on experiences or people's feedback to you?
Yeah, I mean, I've had feedback from a few, I mean, there's a number of points that generate concerns for me. One is like the very wide-ranging information that's coming from inspectors and conflicting information from different people. Second is just last week I was talking to somebody who was, really upset about they had gotten a grant and gone through the program, and there was just no PPE, there was no containment, it was, lead paint flakes all over the yard. And they had no idea who to approach for recourse because they were then reliant on the same person for their clearance, which it put them in a challenging position. Or this was their understanding anyway. Again, the concern being, you know, what do we do with those cases, or how do we identify them first so as to then figure out what to do with them? Because until they're on the table for this group or some other group to evaluate, it's hard to come up with a plan. And then Dr. Bull, as you sort of suggested, there was you were asking about like an on the ground, you know, like I remember this again from the last meeting, we were asking about the lag time between the EBL and the actual process moving forward. And I have had a report of that being extended as well. So, and it's not so much to identify these things so as to like gum up the works, but, you know, to identify them so that as a landlord, say, pursues with their tenant the elaborate process of, say, getting a grant or going through one of these programs, that on the back end of that, they're not saying, why did I do this, or something of that nature. We want to make sure that we're supporting people on the ground to get this work done really well, partially because it's about kids' health and partially so as to reinforce the compliance with the program in a broader sense. So maybe we can just put that on the next meeting agenda for a little bit longer conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I think I share sort of Rob's questions about where this kind of function could live, and like what, just how to operationalize that. But I mean, yeah, I mean, even preceding sort of establishing some of the infrastructure of this board and the Let's Save Cleveland Coalition, I think some of this on the ground information would be very helpful to support landlords and families. Oftentimes, you know, we may hear, like, to the question about reacting to children's elevated blood lead levels with an inspection, you know, speaking with Director Kimball, oftentimes it's very hard. There are certain families where it's very hard to contact those families. And we experience that clinically, right? Especially if families with housing instability, they may have shifting contact information. So from the standpoint of the, you know, of the folks who are trying to accomplish the inspection, it can be hard to track some families down. Why is that? And what is the root cause of that? And then I in clinic may have families who say, well, I never heard from anybody. But, you know, so where to really sort of dive into where the disruption is and how can we address the issue. Same with some of the issues you've identified with contractors and some of the challenges on the ground that they may be experiencing that we don't really see unless we're sort of on the ground collecting that information. I feel the same way about, you know, early intervention referrals and what our families experiencing with really connecting with meaningful services and those kinds of things. So I definitely have on my wish list a desire to really illuminate where some of those gaps and barriers are, but I'm struggling a little bit with what that looks like and where it lives. A lot of these issues and these wish list items have like really preceded even this infrastructure. You know what I mean? I think this is a long-standing need for some additional information on the ground. And so maybe we do sort of put a pin in it for now and think about how we might operationalize and fund such a thing.
So
Awesome.
Scott,
Yeah.
you're basically talking about a quality assurance type program for the contractors? Is that what I'm hearing you asking? How can we implement a quality assurance program or a model?
Yeah, I think that would be one component of this, would be to ensure that people who are getting an RRP certification are, to the extent that we want them to, complying with the requirements of that certification. And I think it's worth noting that, like, culturally, I don't think that compliance with those requirements has historically gone hand in hand with getting the certification. And so, like, we're swimming upstream, I think, and it's important to note that. We can turn that around, but I think it'll take time. Then that's one piece. And Dr. Bull, I totally agree with you too on the challenges of communication that are hard to assess from the top, like from an eagle's eye view. You know, in real life, if a landlord and a tenant both have to apply for funding together, like a needs-based funding application, just the inherent challenges and that can blow that process up. There's those little things that a practitioner experiences on a regular basis that can be really valuable to our broader understanding of what's going to work and what's not. So, Director Allen, yes, that would be one, you know, important piece to this puzzle. I think that there are others under the broader banner of sort of compliance.
Okay.
Scott, I did want to mention, remind the board that starting shortly, the auditor will be doing a series of interviews with implementing agency representatives at from the coalition and building and housing. It's not a grassroots set of interviews at this point. It's trying to take stock of what collectively do the implementers see as the challenges and successes in the work. But we have talked about actually going to tenants and property owners in a second round. I think one of the and no surprise to this group, if we talk to the people who have been compliant, that represents folks who have done a good job getting their properties there. So that's not, we need to find a way to get a diverse set of voices of those who have had different experiences with the process. And I think we can get there, but right now we've got a limited view.
So I think that we're running out of time here, but I think that this definitely merits further discussion at our next meeting. So maybe we could carve out, some additional time, because I think this is fairly fundamental to the work we're trying to do. The final item here is to do a quick update from Rob on the platform for feedback and comment and input that we were hoping to house on a website. So Rob, if you could give us a quick update on that.
Yes. So the plan has been to, after much discussion with the board about how to make sure that we can make all the information publicly available in an accessible way. I think we have agreed that we at Case Western at the Poverty Center will have a dedicated lead auditor page, which will have on it copies of our reports, relevant presentations, and also a mechanism for folks to submit comments or questions that can then be summarized and brought to this board. So our plan is, now that we have essentially two quarter reports, that we will launch that page and put all this information up this month. So that's what I would say. Why not? That's what I'll say right now. Now that after a summer of some churn, I think we're now ready to launch that, and we would like to cross advertise that with the coalition and with the city through building and housing, just like we're going to advertise these meetings going forward. We want to have that multi-pronged approach to advertising the location of this auditor page, so that folks can see it's independent of the city, but we also want to make available the resources and accept comments. So going back to your point, Scott, I think this board plays a key role as a place folks can submit those concerns or experiences in a way that they can be not case managed, because that's not what we can do, but we can make referrals, we can summarize themes that are coming up from different people's experiences.
Great, thank you. So we maybe can expect to have something ahead of the next meeting in terms of an initial summary, as well as a sort of a piece in the agenda where you can describe that rollout, describe the platform, and just make sure everybody understands it. Great, thank you. And again, just to review that again, we will be, all of us, please try to get your schedules. I know myself included, trying to respond to when it's polls to make sure we can get our next meeting set as soon as possible and get that notice out prior to November. Yeah, Wynette, go ahead.
I just, before we ended, I see that there was a question in the chat. Wanted to see if you wanted to address it or not.
I do see that question. We are essentially out of time at the moment. I would love to answer that question, is there an email address that would be good for during these meetings? Like right now, can somebody give an email address that question can be sent to, so that, and I'm happy to respond to the email, but so that it can be responded to.
We can follow up with you, Commissioner Jackson.
Okay, and in the future, those types of questions will hopefully be able to go through the portal that's being established. So, yeah, thank you all for being here for this meeting. I think we're about to wrap up here. I guess one remaining question is the chair spot for the next meeting. You know, I'm happy to reprise the role, or we can send it down the line. It's up to you guys what you want to do. Any thoughts on that? Would you, I can do it again for the next meeting if that's.
Works. Hey, I vote with Diana.
What was Diana's vote? Oh, got it. Okay, all right. Well, I will, unless there's any objection, I will take on that responsibility for the next meeting as well. And why not thank you again for coordinating all the logistics to make this meeting happen, and Rob for your work on the report, everyone else for your input, Diana for taking the minutes. This concludes our meeting, and we will see you all in November. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.